Mr. Rafiee, as you know, the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, was absolutely military, and it happened because of the usage of power by the Taliban. Do you think still there is hope, there is opportunities for the Afghan community to make peace with this group? If yes, how and why? As you know, there is no democratic system and no constitution in Afghanistan right now. And civil spaces also shrink because of the new government. How civil society actually can be still alive and engage with the de facto authority, and to bring peace even under the Taliban's government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ahmadi. I really appreciate Ms. Ahmadi. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the call to this conference today. And I would like to also express my gratitude to colleagues who have dedicated their time to make this event happen. Well, I would prefer to start with the issue of how the Taliban took the power, because it was not only actually a solely military issue. There was also a deal for peace and reinstating the Taliban during the time of the negotiation between 2018 to 2021, where Mr. Khalilzad, the Ambassador Khalilzad, actually was trying to reinstate the Taliban and get them back into a very better stage, while the Taliban have not been able to gain any success in the last 18 years of their presence in Afghanistan. So they were actually doing a very guerrilla type of work rather than actually having a very strong... do you want us to keep our video on, or you want us to keep the video off?
If you can turn your videos on, would be great, because we want to also see your beautiful faces. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering if there is a permission or not. Anyway, so I believe the Taliban was reinstated in the 2-3 years, and then they were given the power by the United States and the other political actors who were working a sort of proxy or continuing a sort of proxy war in Afghanistan. The takeover of the Taliban was coming into 3 dimensions. One was the unsuccessful, behavior or work of the government, of the democratic government in Afghanistan, because the government was involved in so many corruption and so many different, types of issues related to the corruption issue, and also very biased and pro-discrimination, type of government in Afghanistan, which created a distrust environment between brother nations of Afghanistan or brother ethnic groups in Afghanistan, which also created a very bad environment of trust among the people itself, inside the country. And there was a huge distrust towards the government, both the government, which was, the government of Karzai and government of Ghani, because they both had a very strong and deep involvement in the corruption from one side, and also from the sort of very dictatorship type of governance and their system and structure from the other side. If you see the roots of this corruption and this actually naive government that they created, is based on the corruption that they did, or the fraud that they did in the election processes, which actually discredited the democratic processes in Afghanistan. So people were completely hated, against the election, because the election was so fraudulent that people could not actually trust going to the election will make a difference for them. And perhaps in the last election, which was held by Dr. Ghani Ahmadzai, was actually had the least participation of people in it. So that was something that we cannot compare to the first one, which was actually convened in 2004. And Karzai was actually somehow the winner. Of course, there were issues about the corruption there as well, but I think that was a bit of a much more fair election in comparison to the 3 other elections or 5 other elections that we had, including the second rounds. I mean, my impression from the takeover of the Taliban is that the Taliban came into a deal, and then the deal was done by the proxy groups inside Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan. And actually, it was also including a number of government, around Afghanistan, including our neighboring countries and some other countries who are not our neighbor, but they are actually very deeply involved in Afghanistan. I mean, one of the ambassadors that I met before the collapse of Kabul, he said that the deal is not that way that the Taliban will take everything. There is that the ambassador was actually very in one of the they have proxy groups in Afghanistan. So I think that ambassador was in a belief that the Taliban will be taken over, will be given the power to but that would be limited and they will be controlled. So this is what I was completely disagree on the time, and I said that it's impossible actually to control the Taliban because the Taliban are so centralized, and they are actually so solely ideologic that you cannot actually put the issue into a sort of back into a democratic type of government later. I mean, the Taliban takeover in the peace with the Taliban goes back to the issue of how we see the conflict drivers in Afghanistan, how we see the peace and conflict drivers in Afghanistan. I mean, the conflict and peace drivers in Afghanistan are so many at this moment, and actually starts from different perspectives. If you see it from a political perspective, and if you see it from a strategic perspective, and from geopolitics perspective, and also from a social perspective in Afghanistan, that's completely a complicated issue scenario. Afghanistan has been suffering from conflict for the last 5 decades, and actually it suffers from conflict, from ethnic conflict for the last 2 centuries or 1.5 centuries. And I think the government in Afghanistan has been so centralized that, including the the members of the ethnic groups who were in power, they were very badly discriminated. So it is a systematic systematic discrimination and prejudice type of government in Afghanistan, which not only victimized the other ethnic groups in Afghanistan, but also the one who was in the power, or who were in the power. This is exactly when we see at least the 50 years of conflict in Afghanistan, and the war and the civil war, the process, and you see that how the atrocities actually were shaping among different citizen groups and different ethnic groups in Afghanistan. So I must say that the conflict drivers in Afghanistan has a historical base. And if you want to talk about the peace in Afghanistan, you have to go to the drivers of the conflict and peace in Afghanistan and see what are the important drivers there. For me, at least I can say that at this moment, beside the interest of the neighboring countries and strategic depth of our neighboring countries in Afghanistan, there are many other social and internal factors who are also very important in terms of the drivers for peace and conflict in Afghanistan. I think one of them is the poppy. The poppy issue is in Afghanistan, as a cultivation of poppy in Afghanistan is an extremely important factor for the driver, or one of the drivers of the conflict in Afghanistan. The issue of the power in Afghanistan has always been an issue of conflict, and the distribution of power in Afghanistan, the issue of how people see or political groups see in Afghanistan, their involvement in the process as citizens of the country. There have been a huge discrimination against people who, in terms of the ethnic, base, or in terms of the linguistic, religion, and many other aspects. Even regionally, actually, north, south, and east and west, there have been a very strong discrimination in terms of in the structural discrimination inside the politics of Afghanistan. It doesn't matter who has been in power; it actually includes everyone. So everybody has a sort of discriminative mentality in Afghanistan, and discrimination in Afghanistan has become part of the culture, and it is actually very visible. It's not hidden now. It is completely visible, and you see it. And for example, if you see to bringing down the Persian or the Farsi or the Dari titles of the university, for example, the Danishgah, the word of Danishgah, is a very strong discrimination, which is actually based in a cultural, from a cultural perspective, which is very unfair. If you see it from a modern mentality of coexistence and tolerance and coexistence. I think in Afghanistan, we have never focused mainly on the issues that we actually needed to focus mainly on, particularly on the issue of examples of coexistence and tolerance and cooperation with others. I would also like to say that the peace with the Taliban is possible, but unless the Taliban are still continuing to be on their ideological position, it is impossible to come up with a Taliban, because the Taliban, the way that the Taliban think is a Deobandi mentality. And in the Deobandi mentality, there is a huge problem, not only with the Shia groups of or sects of the Islam, but also with the Sunni sects and groups of Islam as well. I must say that the mentality of the Taliban, which is coming, they arrived, the translation that they have from Islam is a Deobandi translation. And this Deobandi translation is very discriminative, and it was actually shaped in a very bad situation in India, which was also discriminating among the other ethnic groups, which actually caused the partition of India from Pakistan from India. And also the current problem that they are facing now is because of the Deobandi mentality, which actually reduced completely the tolerance in Islam and actually divided in a black-white status the mentality of Islamists in India. This mentality is very predominant in Pakistan and in Taliban, and actually also in the interest of Pakistan. The other issue with the Taliban and peace with the Taliban is there are proxy groups in Taliban which actually working on creating fear and creating cruel actions against the other ethnic groups in Afghanistan, which actually this proxy group of which works only for the intelligence of the I can't say the intelligence of the international community, but because I don't have evidences, but I think there are involvement of the international intelligence groups in Afghanistan, which actually create a sort of distrust environment between the ethnic groups. For example, the genocides that the Taliban are doing now at this moment, and the assassinations of the prisoners. For example, what they do in Panjshir, what they do in Andhra, and what they do actually in Daikundi and Ghazni and Malistan area, and also in Naur of Ghazni, and also in Daikundi, and also in other provinces, and including actually even in Nangarhar, I mentioned. I should not forget that one as well, and also in Helmand, and also in provinces like Paktia and Khost. I think these act of the Taliban is creating a very strong and a very deep and very cruel picture of atrocity for the next generation, because they will remember. So people will remember what happened to them, and there would be a moment of revenge from the other side. And the Taliban actually is doing this by purpose, because they want Afghanistan to be in a deeper civil war, into in a big civil war again, and then the hostility between the ethnic groups should be created. And the Taliban actually is doing that by purpose. And I'm sure people will see a very bad outcomes of very bad outcomes of this issue in the very next years, 2, 3, 4 years. And the Taliban peace with the Taliban would be impossible in this even ethnic ethnic minorities within the Pashtun groups, and particularly between the Ghiljais and the Durranis, they will be very badly discriminated, between each other, and actually resistance will start from them as well. I think the Taliban, unless they change their mentality of translation of Islam and the mentality from the very specific ideology of the Deobandi, they would not be able to gain any other group to join for their peace. And if there is a drastic change in the leadership of the Taliban, and there is a drastic change in the mentality of the Taliban, particularly in terms of the citizen discrimination, and most specific on the issue of the women and women's rights in Afghanistan, that would be impossible to come with the Taliban and get with the Taliban and go along with the Taliban. The status of the democratic system in Afghanistan, also the constitution in Afghanistan, I would like to say that Afghanistan is currently in a state of lawlessness. We don't have any law. Every single member of the Taliban is the judge, is the policeman, and is the executive, has the executive power. So he is the investigator, he is the prosecutor, he is the judge, and he is the one who is making the decision. And this actually has happened, and it's very obvious. You can see it very clearly all around the country. The Taliban are doing their own, and whatever they make a decision, they do the decision on a specific individual, manner or status. And this actually has also created a huge distrust between some of the members of the Taliban themselves and some of the groups, different political groups who are pro-Taliban at the beginning, but they are not pro-Taliban at this stage. And the Taliban will show that they will only be thinking about themselves, not the others. I must also say that Taliban do not have any belief in any respect to any other law except the Sharia law. In the Sharia law that they actually follow is a very specific Sharia consideration, which is the Deobandi type of the mentality, which actually also create a huge number of problems with the other sects of Islam, including the Sunnis, particularly with the Hanafi fiqh, with the sect of Hanafi. And having said that, I must say that it would be very difficult for the Taliban to maintain the current power that they have for a longer period of time. One. The second issue is very difficult for the Taliban to gain the trust of any other group except themselves, which is actually a very strongly decreasing, a very hardly or deeply decreasing support at this moment that they have. The Taliban are running out of soldiers. Pakistan would not be able to continue their support for a longer period because of the pressure of the international community. So the Taliban are facing a number of problems at this moment, and this will create a huge problem for them. And that would be impossible for them to continue for a longer period. They may continue for some years, but not for a longer period. And that would be very difficult for them. And then, of course, every day they are losing the trust and the interest of people. And that would be very difficult for them to maintain this and to continue the way that they are doing it now. Thank you very much. And I would be more than happy to answer any question that you might have. I will turn off my video because of the bandwidth of the internet. So I don't want anybody to be discriminated to see the others.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aziz Rafiee. We actually heard so many important aspects of the current situation in Afghanistan that we needed to hear.